Hello, everyone, and welcome to the inaugural episode at Oz Arab Media based on ethical investment and presented by Wholesum Fund. Wholesum Fund is an ethical investment fund led by Dr. Tanvir Uddin. And Dr. Tanvir Uddin has his headquarters here in Sydney, Australia, which is really exciting. And he's found some time to squeeze us in his busy schedule to join us today to share insights from his inspiration and, of course, to encourage people to spend their money wisely, especially those who are looking for options for value-driven investments and how they can make their money grow for them. Because we know that happiness and success is not a zero-sum game. The more you spread it around, the more it's actually going to give you opportunities for finding ways to expand your happiness and success. So let's find out more from the expert who has worked at McKinsey in Australia, the Clinton Foundation in Indonesia, and the Islamic Development Bank in Saudi Arabia. So welcome to the show, Tanvir.
Thank you so much, Sage. Great to be here with you.
Well, where do we start? You've got so much going on. I guess it'll be great to find out, first of all, if you don't mind, fluidly, about your background and how you decided to get into investment, ethical investment.
Yeah, sure. I definitely did not envisage going into the world of investments and finance. When I was finishing up high school, I thought I'd be a school teacher because my mum was a teacher and I was inspired by the teachers around me. But the key thing for me was impact, and I wanted to make use of my whatever talents I had, whatever knowledge I had to try and make a difference in other people's lives. So that was always the theme. And many years later, I realized that through finance and investments, we could really accelerate impact for communities, particularly underserved segments of society. So that was sort of the thematic, and then finally an opportunity came. And why I got into finance, it was actually really serendipitously because I was working at McKinsey in corporate. We were working with very large organizations, particularly a lot of mining organizations that were going through transformations or trying to manage very large projects and do them in a very capital efficient way. And I was finishing up my time as a business analyst in McKinsey, and one of my colleagues who was a bit senior began working in a social enterprise backed by a fund, that being the Clinton Foundation. And when I heard about what the work she was doing, I was like, this is so exciting and amazing, where I could apply my corporate experience and the skills I was learning as a consultant, but actually trying to solve problems for, in this case, smallholder farmers in Indonesia. And it was an opportunity to go and travel and work in Indonesia, but in a very rigorous kind of environment. And that was my first foray into finance. And that led to many other things, including work in the Islamic Development Bank, and then eventually starting my own fund. But yeah, it was really just that sort of curiosity of how can we make impact. Whilst I'm primarily working in a commercial investment fund, I did spend some time working at a charity even before McKinsey. And I felt that charities do a lot of great work and it's important to support them. As a vehicle for social change, I found that there were some limitations. There's a lot more money around in commercial capital than philanthropic capital. And my aspiration became, if we channeled the commercial capital into projects, initiatives, communities that could still generate a commercial return, but could have a great social and positive environmental impact as well, then that's far more scalable, and there's a lot more capital that would be behind it. So that became sort of my that fixation into how to make investments not only ethical but impactful, and that's what drove me eventually into Wholesum.
Wow, that's incredible. So I'm seeing here that you are really taking control of the infrastructure that you saw that was creating opportunities and benefits for people, but you're finding a way to just shift the focus, talk the language of the commercial investors, and then activate those microfinance investments even further.
Yeah.
Which sounds like the PhD in microfinance has really paid off.
Yes, it was definitely an eye-opener, particularly to, I guess, appreciate what's happening outside the typical financial world that we hear in the news. I mean, the news talks a lot about interest rates, banks, stock market. And obviously in Australia, the property market is one of the hottest things to either be a participant in or at least comment on if you're complaining about the rising prices of houses, particularly in Sydney. But there's a whole world out there. There are economies outside Australia and the US and Europe, such as Indonesia and Brazil and the Indian subcontinent. And that's what I had familiarization with during my PhD, because I was looking at Indonesia and Bangladesh as my case studies. So geographically, there's a lot more in the world than we hear and feel in the news. Secondly, yes, microfinance and small medium businesses, these are segments of the economy, and even they exist in Australia. We buy coffee from a local business, a local cafe. We get our hair cut from a barber. We might take up services from an accounting firm. These are all small businesses that are pivotal in our economy, but they don't get the same limelight. But yet they're so critical for job creation. They help reduce poverty in communities. They employ a lot of women who are looking for part-time gigs. So they play a critical role in the economy, not to mention the taxes that they pay. But they need capital. And here's a way that if we can make that asset, I'll call it an asset, available to broader investors, then not only do we create a win-win, but it's far more inclusive of society. And I think that's where I saw. And from my PhD and subsequent work experience, the thing I was thinking about was, how do I make this asset class attractive to investors who are otherwise thinking about returns, thinking about risk mitigation, thinking about where, what are the risks how does that fit into their broader portfolio? So those are sorts of questions and challenges that I had to overcome as I started to design Wholesum and launch our fund. Yeah.
Fantastic. So from a sort of marketing branding perspective, when I do look at, charities showing us what's going on in Bangladesh or what's going on in exotic parts of the world that may not have the same security or stability of life as we do in Australia, we're so lucky to have here.
Yeah.
We get shown a certain frame, and I don't know how effective that frame is really in driving value.
Yes.
It's sort of creating, empathy, I guess, or sympathy, but it just seems like, if you give your money, we'll go do something, but we don't really see the outcomes. We might see, I myself went to Nepal and gave $50 to a school, 50 Australian dollars to a school, and I was so impressed with the whole school getting school pencils and school books to write with.
Yeah.
And I got to give them out myself. So it was first-hand. But sometimes with all the money passing through all the different hands before it actually reaches the program, we could see maybe a small deficit there.
Yes.
Of your generous donation.
Yes.
I think what you're doing is more hands-on and more transparent than some of the charitable organisations. So it'd be great to get into the actual discussion that we were planning to do today. It's been wonderful hearing just off the book what you've been doing. So why do you think, on a whole, is ethical investment more important than ever in today's economic and social climate? And how does Wholesum Fund, that you've put so much thought into developing, define and uphold its commitment to ethical principles?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think if we look broadly, the emerging participants in the financial ecosystem, particularly investments, one large group is the growing millennial population and Gen Z, who are far more financially literate than the previous generations were. And so they are asking questions. They're learning about how to manage money. And part of that is they don't just want to make money for the sake of making money. They want to know how that money is made, what impact it's having in the world. So there's a lot of surveys that have shown that millennial and Gen Z investors care about the ethics of their investment. They care about the impact of their investment. The other big segment is and obviously they're beneficiaries of massive, what they call the big wealth transfer that's happening from baby boomers and Gen Xers as they pass on to their inheritors and through large contributions that come out of that, right? And it's been in the news recently about how, Bank of Mum and Dad is passing on capital. So there's expected to be trillions of dollars of transfer. And so that means they're going to own a lot of capital and they're going to be decision makers. The other big group is women, and women are far more active, not only through greater income earning potential, but through greater changes in policy and benefits, particularly in superannuation. And they're also going to be inheriting some of the wealth, particularly from family members and so forth. And women, and surveys have shown, women care a lot more about how their money's made, where the money's going. So all of that shows there's an emerging trend towards more ethical investments. And that's parallels with consumer trends as well, for people who want to have more sustainable packaging or sustainable sourcing of food and organic food and supply chain. So it's part of that general trend. And part of it is a realization that the old model where I'm going to make a lot of money on this side of my activities and that will generate a lot of wealth, great. But I'm not going to care about how that wealth is made and whether I'm damaging the environment and I'm harming populations. Like maybe my business activities and investments are involving child labor, or they are involving they're exploiting the human rights of communities that I'm working in, or maybe environmental destruction. So I don't care about that, and then I'm going to do some philanthropy on this side of my ledger, and somehow that's going to make up for it. And so much of that's being dismissed. There's an author that I'm reading right now, Tom Schwab, who has a blistering critique of Bill Gates and sort of his legacy. There's so much critiques coming out about some of the wealthiest corporations and philanthropists who kind of that dichotomy isn't quite fitting well for a more sustainable world. So what that means is that people are looking for how do we create, and so there's many different phrasings around this, but essentially it's a triple win for people, for profit, and for planet. That businesses can be profitable, they can have positive impact for society and individuals, and also for the planet, and do it in a sustainable manner. So I think we're tapping into that theme. And also from a branding perspective, I didn't want to just become another fund manager or create another financial service that was doing more of the same. That didn't excite me. If I was doing that, I might as well just go back to corporate and do another job. If I was going to do something, I wanted to be meaningful. Going back to the theme I said early on, that when I wanted to be a school teacher, I wanted to impact lives. And that's what keeps me excited. Otherwise, I get bored really easily, as I tended to get to at some point at McKinsey. So then the question was, okay, how do we design a fund that is going to uphold those values and achieve the impact that we want it to? And so ethical filtering and ethical sort of considerations, there's a lot of funds out there and financial players. Australian Ethical is one of the largest well-known players in Australia that do that. Essentially, it comes from filtering out activities that are harmful. So, your tobacco industry exposure, so alcohol or gambling, casino. For us as well, we have exposure to a lot of investors and investees from the Muslim community, both in Australia and globally. So interest bearing and sort of the debt burden and how interest can be harmful was also a consideration for us from an ethical lens. It's a bit different to some of the other ethical funds. But then moving beyond the negative filters, we enter the domain of what are we actually actively looking for. And the first thing for us was the theory of change. The theory of change is if we invest into small, medium businesses, it's going to create first, second, and third order impacts in terms of the businesses themselves will be able to produce goods and services that are value. They're going to create jobs, and then that job creation and economic activity is going to create taxation revenue. So you can see that there's a cascading flow-on effect that if we support small businesses, this is what they can do for society. So our first positive impact lens is that theory of change. And then, of course, in our business selection process, we will prioritize investments that are either empowering migrant and minority founders in Australia, and in globally, we'll look at which communities we can have a positive social impact in. So for example, we're looking at a deal right now to invest into enterprises that are running schools in rural Kenya. And these are schools in communities that are extremely poor, but the school becomes an engine for growth for those communities, not only through education, but the job creation, the procurement processes. So that's an example of education empowerment. Another example would be we invested into a company in Melbourne that manufactures and installs energy-efficient hot water units for businesses. So there's a decarbonisation opportunity out of that, but they face a working capital challenge. So those are some examples of how we try and prioritise impact-driven businesses whilst also applying ethical filters.
Wow, that's amazing to hear. Yeah, I'm really loving the sounds of that, because sometimes I'm just imagining, someone from Kenya who may not be used to going into a bank, wandering into the bank, which can seem a little bit cold and unfriendly at times, and trying to express what they need their money for. And I guess it's just going to, shut them down even before they get into the door. So I guess what you're doing is really just opening up these pathways for opportunity for them, and just making the process a little bit more inclusive, and just creating that traction from there.
No, absolutely. And a lot of the times we need to work with technology to enable that. So some of our partners, like in the partner we're working with in Kenya for that deal, they go in with cameras and technology to integrate financial data to help get a proper picture of those businesses, to actually make them what the investment world calls investment grade. That, okay, we have a great understanding of the financials, there's some good risk mitigations in place, now it's worth investing into. Otherwise, they wouldn't invest into that. So those are sorts of things, the innovations and practices that we need to be exposed to and make available to investors who otherwise would find those locations very exotic and would never consider investing in Kenya or Indonesia, and try and find a way to get into the Australian property market otherwise.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very convincing investment model, the real estate market, but not everyone's so sold on it, like myself. Some people have won Nobel Peace Prizes for doing what you're doing. I think back in, was it 2016 or was
2006, Mohammed Yunus, yes.
So, it's really admirable.
I'm nowhere near any of those Nobel laureates. No. The work that people like Mohammed Yunus have done in the space is just incredible. But they've persisted over a long period of time. But there is a theme in that I think we can all draw inspiration from, which is that when he went to a bank to get some money for the first women that he was wanting to fund in the 1970s, the banks laughed at him. They did not believe that these people were bankable, right? And I think we can all see that it's that persistence, it's making those communities accessible to the broader investor community. It's that effort that unlocks that opportunity. And think about all the impact that he's had. He demonstrated that model with Grameen Bank, and that created an amazing dynamo effect across the world. And now microfinance is nothing to balk at. It's available even in Australia. And so I think we can all kind of find, how do we create those, and he calls that the bamboo kind of effect, which is like, not the bamboo effect, he calls it the bonsai effect, where he says all these people, they're like a bonsai, they're stunted because of the environment they're in. We just need to open up and release their potential. And I think there's bonsais in all the sectors and communities we all work in. So for me, it's just there's a lot of inspiration from those amazing trailblazers.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see the businesses in the circular economy that are coming out of some of those exotic villages and things like that.
Yes.
Some great innovations. Some of the best robotics inventions are coming out of Africa.
Yes.
Which is amazing. So Wholesum Fund has a unique focus on leveraging the innovation and resilience of migrant founders. How does this influence your investment strategy? And what kinds of support do you offer to help these founders scale their impact? Is there a process? Do boxes need to be ticked before you believe they will give you a return?
Yeah, absolutely. So as an early stage fund, it's really important for us to have a very strong, robust risk management framework, because we are taking on the capital from our investors on trust, and they're expecting us to manage that wealth really well and to find investments that fit the mandate that they've given us. And so we are, I would say, quite a conservative investor at this stage. We'd love to be at a point where we have a large $100 million plus fund, and we can always experiment with a few million here and there to try things that are very catalytic, maybe having a stronger impact thesis and less of a commercial return thesis. But at the moment, we've got to balance these things across. So in terms of when we invest into a direct company, we look for a couple of different factors. The first is we really dig into their financial statements to understand how profitable they are, what their trajectory of profit has been over the last couple of years, what their asset and liability situation is, because we don't want to invest into a business that is in strife, where there's a lot of debt and we potentially are just adding more debt to an existingly highly indebted business. After looking at their financials, if it kind of checks out that they have profitability that can service the financing, plus they're not so sagging in debt that's going to undermine their potential, we would look at how they make money and understand what the unit economics of their revenue is. So are they generally making profit for every customer sale or customer service that they're doing? How well diversified their revenue base is? Because if a business is generally relying on one or two customers, and if those customers fall apart, then the whole business can collapse. Then thirdly, we look at their management and the team and how the capabilities of the team, their experience, the systems and processes in place. And then finally, we look at the industry that they're operating in. What are some of the key risks in the industry? So, are they sort of in a very volatile industry like hospitality and tourism, or are they in a more sort of stable industry that generally has, fairly stable cash flow coming in? So those are a couple of the key considerations initially. And then, of course, we do the standard sort of credit checks, like have they been bankrupt? Do they have a lot of liabilities? Is the business's credit has a strong credit rating or not? So that process is really important for our direct deals, where we are investing typically a larger amount, like typically 200,000 or more. If we're working with a platform partner that's based in another region, then we're looking at their overall performance in terms of how many losses they've had, how they've got risk mitigations in place to manage the deals. And what their capabilities are. So it's a very comprehensive exercise and process, and ultimately we need to have a very diversified portfolio so that no one or two deal will undermine the whole integrity of the fund, and that the fund as a pooled activity can absorb losses if they arise, but still give a competitive return for our investors. Because at the end of the day, it's important to safeguard people's money. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that. I'm seeing that, the Australian film industry or independent film sector could actually benefit from something like this. It'd be great to see it somehow work out, just to make the small-time filmmakers more bankable, like you're saying, because they don't usually set themselves up as marketing agencies or production companies, or there's no market for short films at the moment. So I'm trying to find a way to build a small market or make films more marketable.
Yeah.
Talking to you is very enlightening.
I mean, we talked about financial literacy for individuals in terms of how do I manage my budget and how do I invest. But there's a whole gap in the financial literacy for businesses and business owners. I was just talking to a CFO, outsourced consultant this morning called Real Business Matters. So the founder of that, Rania, she was telling me about that one of the things she does with a lot of businesses is help them actually develop proper financial processes and operational structure so that they can actually understand how their business works and set up proper processes so they can manage money flows and operations in a way to make sure that they're not leaking money or that they are taking advantage of growth opportunities. And so many business owners, and particularly those from migrant and underserved segments in places like Australia, they're just hustlers. They work hard. Whether it be they wash cars or they make amazing coffee. They don't have the brain and bandwidth, and they don't have the sophisticated learning and development to think about, okay, how do I manage my business finances in an effective manner? So that often limits them so that they are not seen as bankable. They might not have proper record keeping, or they don't have the very sophisticated cash flow analysis to really determine, okay, how much money do I need to finance? So, whether it be in those industries or film, there's a real gap there. So one of the things that we're trying to do in Wholesum is we're running these series of conferences around Australia. We're trying to develop more content and guides to actually help business owners get a better sense of their business and also connect them with experts who, whether it be an outsourced CFO function or access to tax accountants and financial planners to better manage that. Because if they can get that right, they can they ensure their business is going to be successful, and then set themselves up for success, so that bankers, investors, and others can eventually say, "Hey, yeah, I want to put money into this business and help it grow." A lot of business owners are just not quite there yet.
Yeah, that's true. I've just heard that. Well, the Australian music festival sector is kind of declining, and the New South Wales government has just invested close to $1 million in 2 major festivals. Both these festivals are owned by controversial major conglomerate of companies that actually do a lot of investing into the weaponry that goes into Gaza, Gaza crisis.
Yes.
So that's not great. So there's a bit of controversy there. But there's so many other smaller independent festivals. Why doesn't the government want to support them? And I guess it's because this, major company knows how to tell the financial story better to the government so that they will invest in them.
Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, it's the bigger players with more resources, whether the legal advice, the tax advice, the financial managers, they just have the scale and capability to do those. I mean, in a similar way, I was reading a really interesting LinkedIn post from a friend, Wei Yao, who's very critical of the philanthropic and charity sector sometimes. But he made a post about how Qantas had a call for application for their grants, and apparently they received like 3,000 applications. And so this friend of mine, he was doing a back of the envelope calculation saying, if we add up all the time and resources that went into these applications, it would outweigh the financial benefit of the grant in the first place. And we think about how, it's only the well-resourced teams who can afford grant writers and, potentially, put together these fancy proposals who will be very successful. So the same goes in business investment. And that's why, we are working in the SME space, because Telstra, BHP Billiton, any of the major corporations, they can easily get funding from any bank, any financial institution, or they can release a bond in the debt capital markets and raise hundreds of millions of dollars. A small business is not going to be able to do that, right? So we need to create ways to empower businesses so they are more bankable and make it easier for them to get access to capital. And we need to convince investors to back them. And so we're trying to, play in that space, which is obviously why they're underserved in the first place.
Yeah, that's right. I guess you act as a conduit there, but also offer some confidence and just some stability to the whole process. And, of course, some... you articulate it better, I guess, that, maybe the business owners aren't always so confident at articulating what they do, why they deserve the money to the investors. Yeah,
and unfortunately, we can't fund everyone, and we have a limited fund. We'd love to have more investors join our fund so that we can actually invest in more SMEs. But even if we are limited in that way, one of the things we try and do is, even if we say, look, we can't invest in your business or it's not ready, we either say, look, keep in touch, or we try and connect them with other resources. Maybe there are other funders out there that they're a good fit for, or there's things that they can do to try and make themselves even more creditworthy. So, it's obviously difficult to say no, and I've been in the back end of being rejected from investment or funding, so I know what that feels like, and it can be devastating sometimes. But it's also trying to share that knowledge or connect them with a resource. So that's really important, that if we can play a role in some way, even if it is not investment.
So what types of companies does Wholesum typically invest in? Then you've mentioned a few. Sustainability is a key factor for you, but also refugees and immigrants here in Australia, and globally you're looking at where you can activate this microfinance as well. Can you walk us through a little bit further into the vetting process to ensure the alignment with both ethical standards and long-term community benefit, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So to kind of break down how we do our investment deals, typically we have three sources of origination for new businesses to invest into. The first is that we will partner with a platform that is already active in the small, medium business financing space, whether it be in Australia or internationally. So internationally, we work with a lot of really innovative financial technology startups or scale-ups now who have developed very sophisticated systems to find businesses that need funding, to vet them, to undergo their due diligence to make sure that businesses are bankable, and then provide them onto a platform that we can access. So we've got a partner in the Middle East that we work with in that way. We also partner with a platform in Southeast Asia. And so that gives us access to a lot of really small investment deals that could be from a few $1,000s even. And we can just spread across into that. So that's one source. And when we do that, we're looking for, obviously, again, SME focus, and we're looking at underserved communities. It might be, so for example, the Middle East or Southeast Asia. And in the case of, I mentioned earlier, in East Africa, we're looking with an education financing platform that invests into enterprises that are essentially schools. They're small, medium businesses that run schools, either individual schools or a network of schools, and they do a lot of the vetting process for us. The second channel for us is to work with brokers. So we work with brokers who, again, are helping to get a business investment ready. And they'll come to us and say, here's a business that we've done some preparedness work on, and they're ready for investment, and here's the terms, and if you're interested. So that could be a way. And again, we would look at the focus areas. That is it an ethical business? Is it sort of serving an underserved segment? Particularly if we're looking at brokers that bring in deals from us from abroad, we'll look at is the operations in underserved community. Like we had a broker who brought a deal for an agriculture finance in Latin America. If we're looking at a broker in Australia, then we're looking for typically women-founded, migrant-founded, or refugee-founded business owners. Again, because we want to help those segments that are underserved. In terms of the third channel, this is where we directly originate. So either they come through our website or they come hear us about an event or someone refers them. And then again, we're looking at similar thing, ethical business. Is it an underserved migrant or a female founder? And then we're going through that extensive financial due diligence process that I mentioned earlier. So how's their financials performing, the track record, the diversification of their business, the credit worthiness, and ultimately making sure that it's a business that has strong, that we have confidence. Obviously, we can't guarantee, but we have confidence that the business is going to do well and be able to pay back our investors with a profit. So those are sorts of the channels that we work in and how we go about our process. We have an internal investment committee that reviews the deals, and we've also recently appointed an external investment committee to provide further oversight of particularly our investments over $100,000. Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. So how many people do you think are working for you or with you at the moment on this?
Well, there's a lot of people, as they say, it takes a tribe or a village to raise a baby. It feels like that with a baby startup like Wholesum. So in our team, we've got 3 members of our investment team. 2 of them are part-time. I'm the full-time member. And our external investment committee are sort of part-time in terms of they spend a few hours on average per month to review our deals. We're about to hire a new person in the investment team to help us manage a larger portfolio of our investments. And I've got a lot of advisors that I go and speak to if they have specific industry expertise or they have knowledge about a particular geography or industry. So there's a lot of people that I rely on for advice and guidance, of course, and as we proceed this. But yeah, that's essentially the team and makeup.
Okay. So reaching the end of the discussion, it's been quite enlightening, to hear what you've been doing. It's really inspirational. And I feel like, if I see some success, I'd love to invest into a business in another geography where the arbitrage would work in my favor. Like if I was to give them, 1,000, that would just mean so much more to them. If there's
Absolutely.
a way I can help.
Compared to just like one-off charity, of course, we should support charities and especially emergencies when they're needed. But if we can create, jobs that are sustainable, businesses that create jobs, of course, and produce real goods and services in communities around the world, that can create a long-lasting, sustainable impact. And that's sort of what we want to do with SME finance, that otherwise just direct philanthropy may not be able to do.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking at how we can find this market for the short films or make more local production, because at a time where Australia's population is growing rapidly, we need a strong sense of national identity, because at the moment the media kind of shows us a very strong sense of reality TV or just one very strong frame of what Australia is when that's evolving rapidly. And I think it'd be better for everyone if it was more representative.
Absolutely.
But the thing is, Australians love American content.
Yes.
And we're probably one of the only countries in the world that have a dislike for their own content, which is very interesting. So I'm trying to find a way to justify creating more, and it's just keep it low cost, make it shorter, narrative reels, integrating brands into that. And why people are averse to that is because when brands come into it, they sort of want to take over. The venture capitalists want to have a say in how things are done. Do the investors in your fund have a say in how business operates that they invest in?
Yeah, so we are a pooled fund through our unit trust structures as normal for most licensed and regulated investment funds in Australia, with an independent trustee who is also a custodian over the capital. So investors essentially are unit holders, so they don't get a say in terms of our investment. Because that's managed. That's why they're investing with us. They're asking us to do the diligence selection for them. So they get access to, they benefit from the entire portfolio instead of picking out a specific investment. And the benefit of that on the flip side is that the risks and losses are shared and distributed so that they minimize the impact. So if a person was to invest all their money in one business and that business wasn't doing so well, that will affect their whole portfolio. But when they're investing in a pool, they all share the benefits, the profits and the losses. That risk sharing, that communal aspect is really key. Obviously, we might look at considering developing new funds. And if a very large investor was to come to us and say, hey, can you create a fund mandate in this? And I'm thinking like they're putting in like, say, $10 million, we could design a more tailored solution for them if that was the case. But yeah, for the fund at the moment, it's pooled. Everyone participates in all the deals and gets the benefit of the deals that way.
Fantastic. Thanks for just clarifying that. Yeah, it helps me understand what you're doing a lot more.
Yeah.
So, I guess to finish off, what have been the most inspiring outcomes you have created on your journey so far?
Yeah, sure. Look, I'll share maybe an example from one of our investments, and then I'll share an example from one of our investors, so a story from there. And then third, I'll share a story from an event that we did, because as part of Wholesum, we do the investments, we've got the business financing, and we're trying to grow that. We also have a third arm of our operations, which are sort of our community engagement, whether it be education, seminars, conferences, and just general consulting as well. So in the first one is the example of an investment that we did into a company called White Lion Foods, and this company is sustainably sourcing Brazil nuts from the Amazon, because Brazil nuts are only grown in the Amazon jungle. You can't grow them anywhere else, and so they reinvest some of their profit into conservation work. They employ a lot of indigenous workers, including a lot of women, and that's an example of an investment where it's a very successful company. It's actually medium-sized, so they generate, I think, more than at least tens of millions of dollars of revenue, and they sell to about 50 or 60 countries around the world. But that investment that we're doing or we're participating in is directly resulting in job creation in the Amazon jungle for indigenous communities and women, because when they have more capital, they can produce more nuts and then they can sell more. That's the key challenge that they have, because they don't have unlimited capital. That's what they need investors for. So that's an example of where investors can get a great return, and we do get double-digit returns from them, and lead to conservation work, empowerment of women, job creation for indigenous communities. So it's an incredible example of what's really possible. And the founder of that company and the CEO, Gareth, he came to the launch of Wholesum last year when we launched the fund, and he shared his personal story about why he did it. And for me, backing entrepreneurs and businesses like that it's just so heartening, and it's just exciting. I love being in that space. I'll share a story from one of our investors, which was a charity. And the charity was basically planning to do some projects down the track, and they had this sum of money that was just sitting there doing nothing. And this charity was also from the Muslim community. They couldn't earn interest on their saved funds. And these were general funds. So they earmarked for projects, but they're currently doing nothing. And they invested into our fund to get a return on that. And that enables them to have more free cash flow resources they can use to cover their operational costs, potentially hire some staff. And that's an example of how our fund solution is helping the charity. And why would the charity invest in something like us and not like put in the stock market or other funds? Because we're mission driven. It aligns with their values. It helps them further their cause. And the third story I'll share, sorry, it's a bit of a long one, is I remember doing a workshop for young people, particularly university students or early graduates, end of 2023. This is just before we launched the fund. And I had 3 young women come to me at the end of the workshop and said, we're really inspired and learned a lot from your workshop. And we've heard about what you talked about, ETFs, exchange traded funds, which are a really easy way to invest. And a lot of financial advisors and thought leaders talk about them. So I was sharing that content, and they said, we want to get our first ETF. How do we find a broker or a channel to get to buy the first ETF? And for me, I thought, if I've achieved anything in life, if I've been able to inspire these young women to take control of their financial lives, to invest in something that they understand and can control from even a small amount of money, and they're taking that first step, then I feel like I've made a difference, because those women are going to use those resources for empowering themselves, their families, and their communities. And I think that's the impact that we can have, even as a small player, that we can really move individuals and communities and charities and businesses to a more sustainable, more inclusive, and ultimately a positively impactful world that they can create for themselves.
That sounds incredible, Tanvir. You know what? Those people have found you in a way that the media couldn't have helped with, really. It was through outreach, through engagement, through you being part of the community.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's so special about what you're doing. So in a sort of a broader scope, haven't run this one by you, but would you want Wholesum Fund to become part of a bank or be usurped into a larger organisation? Is there an exit strategy at the moment?
Yeah, it's interesting. I actually had one of my partners reach out and share that idea because they were having a conversation with the bank. So, yeah, look, the short answer is why not, if it allows us to increase our scale and impact. Because at the end of the day, it's not about me having control and ownership. It's about us increasing the impact that we can have. And if we can convince a large institution to do things more ethically, to help the small person, the small organization, institution, then why not? I'm more than happy to have those conversations. But the key, the sort of caveat is that they're going to align with our mission and our focus and just allow us to do that work really well. So yeah, short answer is absolutely, but we want to find the right partner to be able to do that.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about, what drives us and how I can help people to have more meaningful interactions at work, to engage more with their work and to actually think of better ideas and how to analyse, programs and come up with solutions and get deeper through the interpretations, for their work, but also their family life. And apathy is one thing that's huge. I don't know. It's the gravity in our lives, and I think a lot of that's based on the media and like the mass media and us being fed images subliminally that are dictating our thoughts and our actions and preventing us from taking responsibility, but also, the capitalist traditional ideals of profit before people. So I love how you give companies a chance to increase that triple bottom line. And I think it's so important what you're doing. But of course, having this opportunity today to talk to you at Ozara Media Studios as well is amazing because it's giving us a little bit of leverage, having the local community media supporting this.
Yeah.
Because in America, unfortunately, the public funding for local media, which has been
really
huge
diminished.
over the last
I hear that a lot on my Radio Lab podcast these days. They're really struggling with and they kind of call for more donations.
Yeah.
But the beauty of it is, again, who's backing and supporting these local media groups like Ozara Merit is the small businesses that are sponsors and donors and supporters of that. So again, that community, those community media projects, the charity and philanthropic work and the small businesses are so intimately tied. And we need to empower these spaces and bring all these players together.
Yeah, and actually you giving us just a snippet from each of your projects that you're investing in, it'd be so wonderful to hear more about them and actually get some video footage of them as well.
No, we're working towards doing our first field trip, so hopefully we'll capture some.
Oh, nice. Well, it's been... Thank you for everyone watching today. I hope you enjoyed that and I hope you got something out of it. I certainly did. I'm sure Tanvir is open to any questions. You can approach him via email or his website. What's your website?
Yeah, it's www.investwholesum. It's all one word.com, and wholesome is spelled with a bit of a play on the word, WHOLESUM. So investwholesum, spelled SUM.com. And you can email us at hello@investwholesum.com.
Great. Well, thank you again, Tanvir, and
My
best
pleasure.
of luck.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. Thanks, Ozara Media.